The morning sun hung low over the Texas borderlands, painting the Rio Grande copper and gold. Captain Jacob Morrison, 40 years removed from boyhood and 15 from war, smelled death before he saw it. Gunpowder and blood familiar as morning coffee. The scent carried on the wind that swept across 2,000 acres he'd carved from wilderness with sweat and Spencer rifle fire. 3 bodies lay beside the river, still warm. Jake dismounted slowly, hand moving to the Colt 45 Peacemaker at his hip. Old instincts learned at Gettysburg and honed at Nashville never died. They just waited. His bay gelding sensed the tension, nostrils flaring at the copper smell of spilled blood. Jake checked his surroundings first, like any officer worth his salt. Eyes scanning the cottonwoods for movement, ears listening for the distinctive click of a rifle hammer. Nothing but wind and water. He approached the nearest body, boots crunching on river stones. Father Thomas Brennan lay face-up, Irish features frozen in surprise. The priest's black cassock was dark with blood, 3 bullet holes clustered over his heart. Professional work, military precision. Jake had seen enough killing to know the difference between murder and execution. This was execution. The second body belonged to Miguel Santos, the mission's groundskeeper. Mexican, middle-aged, wearing the simple clothes of a working man. Same wound pattern, same cold efficiency. The third was Carlos Mendez, a ranch hand Jake recognized from town. All 3 killed within minutes of each other, probably seconds. Jake knelt beside Father Thomas, noting details his officer's mind cataloged automatically. The priest's rosary was wrapped tight around his right hand, beads stained red. A small silver crucifix lay in the dirt, chain broken. Near his left hand, a canteen had spilled its contents. Holy water mixed with blood in the Texas dust, creating mud the color of rust. 44-40 round, Jake thought, examining the wounds without touching the bodies. Winchester ammunition, popular with the cavalry. He stood studying the ground. 6 sets of boot prints, all military issue from the wear pattern. Horses shod recently, probably within the week. They'd approached from the south, fired from 15 feet, rode north along the river. The tracks told him everything he needed to know. Former soldiers, well-equipped, moving with purpose. The kind of men who didn't hesitate. The kind who'd killed before and would kill again. Jake pulled his Spencer rifle from the saddle scabbard, a 56 caliber repeater that had saved his life more times than he could count. The weapon felt good in his hands, familiar weight of 7 rounds in the tube magazine. He worked the lever, chambering around, and set the hammer at half cock. Safe but ready. 15 years since Appomattox, he thought. 15 years trying to forget the war, and here it comes riding back on a September morning. The mission bell rang in the distance, carried on the same wind that brought the smell of death. St. Michael's Mission, 8 miles from his ranch, where orphans learned to read and Mexican families found sanctuary. Where Father Thomas had married him to Rebecca, buried her 3 years later, baptized his son William. Where he'd buried William 2 years ago beside his mother. Jake closed his eyes briefly, pushing away the memory. When he opened them, something moved in the cottonwoods 50 yards upstream. His rifle came up smooth and fast, finger finding the trigger, eye finding the sight. Years of drill muscle memory that never faded. A figure emerged from the trees, moving like a wounded deer. Careful, afraid. But Jake could see steel in the spine that reminded him of determination he'd witnessed in soldiers who refused to quit even when common sense said they should. Sister Grace Whitfield stepped into the morning light, her white cotton habit streaked with blood. Jake lowered the rifle but kept it ready. He'd learned long ago that assumptions got men killed. "Miss Grace," he called, voice carrying across the distance. "What happened here?" She gestured toward Father Thomas's body, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. The priest who'd raised her like a father since she was 10 years old. The morning sun caught those tears, made them shine like diamonds against skin gone pale with shock. Her left shoulder showed where a bullet had torn fabric and flesh, a graze that bled but hadn't hit bone. Jake holstered the Peacemaker and approached slowly, hands visible. Even nuns could be dangerous when frightened. "You're hurt," he said, already opening the medical kit he'd carried since the war. Same leather case, same instruments, same smell of carbolic acid and clean bandages. "They came at dawn." Her voice carried the musical accent of educated Spanish mixed with Texas drawl. 6 men. Their leader called himself Colonel Vanderberg. The name hit Jake like a rifle butt to the stomach. Dutch Vanderberg. He'd heard that name whispered in saloons and army posts, spoken in the careful tones men used when discussing dangerous topics. Confederate officer who deserted before Appomattox took his men south, disappeared into Mexico. Word was he'd been building something down there, something the federal marshals couldn't touch. Jake's hands worked automatically, cleaning Grace's wound with practiced efficiency. The bullet had creased her shoulder, tearing a 2-inch furrow through skin and muscle. Painful, but she'd live. He'd seen worse on men who kept fighting. "What did they want from Father Thomas?" he asked, applying carbolic acid. She winced but didn't cry out. "Our land, the water rights." She swallowed hard, fighting for control. Father refused to sell. Vanderburg said he was building an empire, said the conflict wasn't over, just relocated south. Jake had seen this before during Reconstruction. Confederate remnants who couldn't accept defeat trying to carve out new kingdoms in the borderlands, where law was thin and federal authority weak. They preyed on Mexican ranchers, knowing local sheriffs couldn't or wouldn't protect them. "You ran when the shooting started," Jake said. Statement, not question. Grace nodded. "Hid in the river reeds like Father Thomas taught me. Heard everything." That caught his attention. Everything. Vanderburg has 20 men, maybe more. He's recruiting ex-Confederate soldiers, promising them land and gold. Her dark eyes met his steady despite fear. "He said you were next Captain Morrison. Said Union officers didn't belong in Texas." Jake finished bandaging her shoulder, his mind already working through defensive positions and ammunition counts. Command during wartime had taught him to think tactically even when he tried to live peacefully. Is there anything else Vanderburg might want? Something worth killing for, beyond land? She hesitated, glancing around as if Vanderburg's men might be listening from the cottonwoods. Then she nodded reluctantly. "Gold. $20,000 in coin. Donations from Philadelphia benefactors for our new hospital wing. Hidden in the mission's cellar vault. 20,000. Enough to buy weapons, horses, men. Enough to start the kind of private war Vanderburg was planning." "Where is it hidden exactly?" Jake asked. "In the root cellar beneath our chapel. Only 3 people knew. Father Thomas, Mother, Catherine, and me. Vanderburg's men will tear the place apart looking." "They already are," Grace said quietly. "I saw them at the mission before I came here, searching everywhere." A sound made them both turn, footsteps running, accompanied by labored breathing. Jake's hand moved to his peacemaker, but Grace raised her good arm. "Wait, that's Tommy." A boy emerged from the same cottonwoods, 14 years old, with red Irish hair and a face full of freckles that couldn't hide the shock in his green eyes. Thomas Brennan, called Tommy by everyone who knew him. Father Thomas's nephew, orphaned 2 years ago when cholera took his parents. The same year William died. Jake felt something twist in his chest. The boy was the right age, the right build, moved with the same gangly coordination William had shown at 14. For a moment, standing in the morning light with blood on the ground, Jake was back at his ranch, finding his son torn apart by a mountain lion he should have taught the boy to avoid. "Uncle Thomas," Tommy gasped, seeing the bodies. His face went white. "No, no, no, no!" Grace caught him before he could run to the priest. "Tommy, don't. There's nothing we can do for him now." "Who did this?" The boy's voice cracked, hovering between childhood and whatever came after. "Who killed him?" "Bad men," Grace said gently. "Men the captain is going to help us stop." Tommy looked at Jake with eyes too old for 14 eyes that had already seen parents die and now witnessed murder. "Sir, can you help us? Can you stop them?" Jake wanted to say no, wanted to climb on his horse and ride back to his ranch where the past stayed buried and the future was just empty days stretching toward a grave next to Rebecca and William. But he looked at this boy, this reflection of everything he'd failed to protect, and heard himself say, "I'll do what I can." The ride back to St. Michael's Mission took 30 minutes, Grace and Tommy riding double on Jake's bay while he walked alongside, rifle ready. They moved through country Jake knew like the lines on his hands, 2,000 acres of his own land, then the open range that bordered the mission property. The mission appeared gradually rising from the Texas plains like something from another time. Adobe walls, the color of sandstone, thick enough to stop rifle bullets if properly defended. A small chapel with a wooden cross that caught the morning sun. Schoolhouse, orphanage, wing outbuildings clustered around a central courtyard. 12 nuns lived here, along with 30 orphans and an elderly Mexican couple who kept the place running. Isolated, Jake thought. 8 miles from the nearest town, Redemption and Sheriff Tom Bradley, who rarely visited because Mexican problems weren't worth his time. The mission stood alone, vulnerable, exactly the kind of target men like Vanderberg chose. They entered through the main gate, and Jake immediately began cataloging defenses. The walls were good 12 feet high and 3 feet thick at the base, but the gates were wood easily burned. Windows were positioned poorly for crossfire. No firing positions on the walls, no reinforced positions inside. Built for peace, not war. A figure emerged from the blacksmith's forge, moving with the careful gait of a man who'd learned to walk again after losing part of himself. Sergeant Sam Hartley, 62 years old, missing his left leg below the knee. He used a crutch carved from mesquite wood, polished smooth by years of use. Jake Morrison, Sam called, voice rough as gravel. Heard the shooting this morning. Figured you'd show up. Jake clasped his old friend's hand, noting the grip still iron strong despite age. They'd fought together at Nashville, held a position against overwhelming odds, while Confederate cavalry tried to break their lines. Sam had lost his leg in that fight, crushed by a dying horse. Jake had carried him 3 miles to the field hospital. Sam, good to see you're still breathing. Good to still be worth shooting at, Sam replied. Then his eyes found the bodies they'd brought back on travois. His face hardened. Father Thomas. And 2 others, Jake confirmed. Dutch Vanderberg. Sam spat. That bastard. Heard he was working his way north, stealing land from folks who couldn't fight back. His eyes found Tommy, standing silent and shocked beside the horses. Boy, I'm sorry about your uncle. He was a good man. Tommy nodded but didn't speak. Shock Jake recognized. The kind that hit after violence when the mind tried to process what the eyes had seen. Come on, Sam said, leading them toward the main building. Mother Catherine will want to know what happened. They found her in the chapel, kneeling before the altar in prayer. Mother Catherine Harper, 54 years old, stern-faced but kind-hearted leader of the mission's small community of nuns. She stood when they entered, took one look at Grace's bandaged shoulder and Tommy's face, and knew. Father Thomas is dead, she said. Statement, not question. Yes, ma'am, Jake replied. Vanderberg's men. They wanted information about the gold. Mother Catherine's face remained composed, but Jake saw her hands tighten on her rosary. Did Thomas tell them? No, ma'am, he died protecting it. Then they'll be back, she said quietly, and next time they won't ask questions. They'll simply take. Jake nodded. That's why I need an honest answer from you. Is there anything else Vanderberg might want? Anything beyond the gold? She considered this, then shook her head. The gold is everything. 20,000 in double eagle coins meant for our hospital wing. Without it, we cannot expand, cannot serve the families who depend on us. Where exactly is it hidden? In the cellar beneath this chapel, behind a false wall Father Thomas constructed. Only the 3 of us knew. She paused. Now only 2. Grace stepped forward. Mother Captain Morrison wants to help us, but we need to tell him everything. There's nothing more to tell, child. We have 30 orphans, 12 sisters, and 2 elderly caretakers. We have the gold, we have our faith, and now we have enemies who will kill for what we possess. Sam cleared his throat. What we need is a plan. Vanderberg's not going to wait long. Men like him, they hit hard and fast. Jake walked to the chapel window, studying the mission's layout with a tactician's eye. The courtyard offered clear fields of fire, but no cover. The walls provided protection, but no firing positions. The well stood in the center, good for siege, but exposed during approach. We can defend this place, he said slowly, but we'll need time to prepare, and we'll need to reduce our numbers, get the orphans and non-combatants to safety. Evacuate, Mother Catherine's voice was sharp. This is our home, Captain. And it'll be your grave if you don't listen, Jake replied, not unkindly. Vanderberg has 20 men, maybe more, all ex-Confederate soldiers, professional killers. We hold this place. We need every advantage we can get. Sam nodded. Jake's right. Send the children to the Martinez family 20 miles south. They'll take them and no questions asked. And leave the mission empty, Mother Catherine protested. Not empty, Grace said quietly. Defended by those willing to fight. Child, we took vows of nonviolence. And we also took vows to protect the innocent, Grace countered. Her voice was soft but certain. How do we protect 30 children if we're dead? The silence stretched long. Finally, Mother Catherine nodded. Very well. Make your preparations, Captain. But know this, we will not surrender our home without cause. We will not abandon our mission because evil men make threats. No, ma'am, Jake agreed. We'll make them pay for every inch. He spent the next hour examining every corner of the mission, Sam at his side, offering observations from a veteran's perspective. Tommy followed like a shadow, silent but attentive, watching everything Jake did. The boy reminded him so much of William, it hurt. The chapel has the thickest walls, Jake said, sketching in the dirt. We fortify here, create firing positions in the windows, stack sandbags inside for secondary cover, position water barrels for extended defense. Ammunition, Sam asked. I've got 400 rounds of 56-56 for the Spencer, 600, 44-40 for the Winchester, 245 Colt. Jake did the math in his head. Against 20 men, that's maybe 20 rounds per attacker. Should be enough if we shoot smart. Big if, Sam observed. How many of these nuns know which end of a rifle the bullet comes out? None, Grace said, appearing beside them. She'd changed into a fresh habit, her wounded shoulder properly bandaged. But I'm willing to learn. Jake studied her. 22 years old convent, raised educated in medicine and scripture. Not the typical recruit for warfare, but he'd seen determination like hers before in soldiers who refused to quit, even when their bodies said they should. You sure about this, he asked. Shooting paper targets and shooting men are different things. I understand, Captain, but I can't stand by while others fight for us. She met his eyes. My biological father was a Union officer, Captain Henry Whitfield, killed at Petersburg in 1865. I was 10 years old when they brought his body home. My mother died giving birth to me. She paused, looking toward where Father Thomas's body lay. Father Thomas became my father after that. Raised me in the church, gave me a home, a purpose. He was the only father I really knew. Jake nodded slowly. 3rd Pennsylvania Infantry. Good unit. I've fought alongside them at Chancellorsville. If your father had half your spine, he died well. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Jake said. Learning to kill is easy. Living with it after is the hard part. He set them to work organizing defenses with the same efficiency he'd once used commanding a company. Sam directed the construction of sandbag positions, his knowledge of fortification still sharp, despite years away from combat. Grace helped organize supplies, her medical training useful for planning triage positions. And Tommy watched everything, absorbing lessons he shouldn't need at 14. As the sun climbed toward noon, Jake found himself teaching the boy basic rifle handling. They stood in the courtyard, Jake demonstrating the Winchester lever action while Tommy listened with fierce concentration. 15 rounds in the tube magazine, Jake explained, working the lever. Rate of fire 1 round every 2 seconds if you're good. Effective range about 200 yards, maximum 300. Can I try? Tommy asked. Jake hesitated. The rifle in the boy's hands looked wrong, too much weapon for too little experience. But he'd learned at Nashville that green recruits either learned fast or died young. Better to teach now, in safety, than discover the boy couldn't shoot when bullets were flying. Hold it here, Jake said, positioning Tommy's hands. Stock tight against your shoulder. Cheek on the wood. Breathe slow and steady. Tommy's first shot missed the target by 3 feet, his second by 2. The third clipped the edge. I'm terrible at this, the boy said, frustration clear. You're learning, Jake corrected. Big difference. Try again. Breathe, squeeze the trigger, don't pull. Follow through. The 4th shot hit center mass. Tommy looked at the target, then at Jake, eyes wide. I did it. You did, Jake agreed, something in his chest twisted again. Memory of teaching William to shoot, watching his son's face light up with the same pride. Now do it 19 more times without missing. They worked through the afternoon, Jake drilling Tommy on the basics, while Sam constructed firing positions and Grace organized medical supplies. By evening, the mission had been transformed from a place of peace into something that could at least pretend to be a fortress. It's not enough, Sam said, joining Jake on the chapel steps as the sun began its descent. We've got good walls and decent positions, but we're still outnumbered 4-1. 5-1, Jake corrected. Maybe 6, depending on how many men Vanderberg's recruited since we last heard. So what's the plan? We buy time, Jake said. I sent a letter to Federal Marshal Thompson in Austin. If he rides hard, he can be here in 5 days with enough deputies to arrest Vanderberg's whole operation. 5 days is a long time when men are shooting at you. We've held longer with less, Sam grunted agreement. They'd held Nashville for 3 days against superior numbers, survived on ammunition. They'd stripped from Confederate dead and water they'd collected from rain gutters. 5 days should be simple by comparison. Should be. Jake, Sam said quietly. The boy, Tommy, you're going awful hard on him for someone who just watched his uncle get murdered. Hard keeps you alive, Jake replied. Soft gets you killed. He's 14. Jake's hands tightened on the Spencer. I was too busy building the ranch, making money, planning for a future. Didn't take time to teach my son what he needed to know. Mountain lion got him while he was checking traps alone. Found him 3 hours later, too late to save. That wasn't your fault, Jake. So now I'm going to make sure another boy doesn't die because his father figure was too busy to prepare him. Jake stood, ending the conversation. Get some sleep, Sam. Tomorrow we finish fortifications. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Jake lay in the small room Mother Catherine had provided, staring at ceiling beams and remembering. Nashville, where he'd held a position with 30 men against 200 Confederate cavalry, where Dutch Vanderberg had led charge after charge trying to break through their lines, where Jake had ordered the counterattack that drove Vanderberg back, cost him half his regiment, ended his military career. 15 years ago, but the memory was fresh as morning. The smell of gunpowder, the screaming of horses, the weight of command when every decision meant men lived or died. He'd been 26 then, full of certainty and conviction, believing in causes worth dying for. Now he was 40, certain of nothing except that good people needed protecting and bad people needed stopping. Everything else was just smoke and noise. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Grace stood in the doorway holding a candle. Captain Morrison, may I speak with you? Come in, Jake said, sitting up. Something wrong? I wanted to ask about tomorrow, about the training. She sat on the single chair, hands folded in her lap. Sam says you're a good teacher, that you kept men alive in the war through drill and discipline. Sam talks too much. He says you blame yourself for your son's death, that you think better teaching would have saved him. Jake's jaw tightened. Sam really talks too much. Is it true? He considered lying, but something in her eyes, that same determination he'd seen in soldiers who deserved honest answers, made him tell the truth. William was 15, smart kid, good instincts. But I was always working, always building, always planning for tomorrow. Never took time to teach him what he needed to know. If I'd taught him proper tracking, proper awareness, he'd have seen the signs. Would have known to climb a tree fire warning shot, something. Grace was quiet for a long moment. My father died at Petersburg. I was 10. The army sent his body home in a pine box, along with a letter saying he died heroically charging Confederate positions. She looked down at her hands. For years I blamed him for dying, for leaving me and my mother. Then my mother died in childbirth, and I blamed her too. Blamed everyone except myself for being the one left behind. That's different. Is it? She met his eyes. You blame yourself for William's death. I blamed my parents for mine. Both of us carrying guilt that doesn't belong to us. She stood. Tomorrow when you teach me to shoot, teach me like you would have taught William. Not out of guilt, but out of love. Because that's what Father Thomas would have wanted. What William would have wanted. She left before Jake could respond, leaving him alone with thoughts that chased sleep away until dawn. The next morning brought riders on the horizon. Jake spotted them from the chapel roof where he'd been checking fields of fire. 6 men moving at a steady pace, no attempt to hide their approach. Military precision in their formation. Confederate discipline in their bearing. Sam, Jake called down. We've got company. Get everyone to positions. The mission came alive with controlled urgency. Grace shepherded the last of the orphans toward the wagons that would take them to safety. Sam checked weapons, distributed ammunition. Tommy took his assigned position at the east wall, Winchester loaded and ready. Jake descended from the roof, Spencer in hand, and walked to the main gate. The riders stopped 50 yards out, just beyond effective pistol range, but well within rifle distance. Smart positioning. Professional soldiering. The leader dismounted and Jake recognized Dutch Vanderberg immediately. 15 years had aged the man, hard-carved lines deep by sun and disappointment, but the same arrogant bearing remained. Confederate gray wool pants, officer's slouch hat, bearing that said he'd commanded men and expected obedience. Even after 13 years, Jake recognized the posture from Nashville. The same confidence, the same certainty, the same doomed conviction that his cause was righteous. Captain Morrison, Vanderberg called, voice carrying the authority of command. Been a long time since Nashville. Jake stepped onto the porch, Spencer cradled in his arms like he was heading out to hunt deer. Casual but ready. Not long enough, Dutch. I hear you've been harboring fugitives. Vanderberg smiled, cold as January wind. That's a serious crime in Texas. The war's over, Dutch. Time you accepted that. Some wars never end, Captain. They just move to new ground. Vanderberg gestured toward the mission. I'm building something here, an empire where men like us can live without Yankees dictating terms. By murdering priests, by stealing from orphans, by taking what's rightfully ours. This was Confederate territory before you bluebellies carved it up and handed it to foreigners. His eyes found the mission walls. Send out the girl and the gold. Maybe we can discuss reasonable terms. No terms, Jake said. No discussion. Get off mission proper. Vanderberg's men spread out with practiced ease, hands drifting toward weapons. Jake counted 6, all carrying Colt revolvers and Winchester rifles. Professional soldiers, not hired thugs. Men who'd learned warfare in places where mistakes meant death. You're outnumbered, Captain. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Jake brought the Spencer to his shoulder in one smooth motion, sighting on Vanderberg's chest. The familiar weight felt good in his hands, solid and certain. I've been outnumbered before, Dutch. Seems to me I remember holding Nashville against 200 of your cavalry with 30 men. How'd that work out for you? For a long moment, nobody moved. Desert wind whispered through sagebrush. Horses stamped nervously, sensing tension in their riders. Jake's finger rested on the trigger, taking up the slack, ready to fire on a breath. Then Vanderberg laughed, the same laugh Jake had heard at Nashville when his cavalry charged their lines with Confederate battle flags flying and certainty in their eyes. The laugh of a man who believed absolutely in his cause, who couldn't imagine defeat even when it stared him in the face. 48 hours, Captain. Send out the girl, surrender the gold, vacate the premises, or we come back with enough men to burn you out. He remounted, movements smooth and practiced. And this time, Morrison, I won't make the mistake of leaving you alive. They wheeled their horses and rode away, dust swirling behind them like smoke from a distant battlefield. Grace emerged from the chapel, Winchester in her hands. They'll return. Yes, ma'am, Jake agreed. They will. Why help us? She looked up at him, genuine curiosity in her eyes. You barely know me. Father Thomas is dead. You could ride away, let Vanderberg have what he wants. Jake looked out at the land he'd fought for, bled for, built with his own hands. Land where his wife was buried, where his son rested beside her. Land that meant nothing if good people couldn't live on it in peace. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said quietly, and because I didn't spend 4 years killing Confederates just to let them rebuild here in Texas. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon promising rain, Jake continued Tommy's training. They worked in the courtyard while Sam constructed the last firing position, and Grace organized medical supplies with the thoroughness of a surgeon preparing for complex surgery. Hold it tighter against your shoulder, Jake instructed, adjusting Tommy's grip on the Winchester. Recoil's going to kick hard. If you're loose, it'll bruise you, black and blue. Tommy nodded, face serious with concentration. The boy was a fast learner, Jake had to admit. Natural steadiness in his hands, good eye for distance and windage. With proper training, he'd make a decent shot. Captain Morrison, Tommy said, not looking away from the target. Can I ask you something? Shoot first, talk after, Jake replied. Never let conversation distract you when you're holding a loaded weapon. Tommy fired the Winchester's lever action, working smoothly. The shot hit 2 inches right of center. Better, Jake acknowledged. Now ask. Why does Vanderberg hate you so much? I mean, the war's been over 15 years. Why is he still fighting? Jake considered how to answer. The boy deserved truth, not comfort. Because some men can't let go of old fights. They build their whole lives around causes that don't exist anymore. When those causes die, they die too. Or they should. Men like Vanderberg, they keep fighting because fighting's all they know. But you fought in the war too. You stopped fighting. I fought because I had to. Stop because I could. Jake helped Tommy reload. Dutch Vanderberg fought because he believed in the Confederacy and Southern independence, in causes he thought were righteous. When we won, we didn't just beat his army. We destroyed everything he'd built his life on. So he's trying to rebuild it here. Now, Jake confirmed. But you can't rebuild on stolen land and murdered priests. That's not civilization. That's just another kind of war. They worked until darkness fell, until Tommy could hit the target 8 times out of 10, until the boy's shoulder was bruised and his hands were sore, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there that morning. Confidence. Sam found Jake later sitting on the chapel steps and cleaning the Spencer by lamplight. The old sergeant lowered himself carefully, favoring his missing leg, and pulled out a flask of whiskey. "You're getting attached to the boy," Sam observed. "I'm teaching him to survive," Jake corrected. "Same thing." Sam took a drink, offered the flask. Jake declined. "He reminds you of William?" "Everything reminds me of William." "That why you're pushing so hard, trying to give Tommy what you couldn't give your son?" Jake's hand stilled on the rifle. "If I can keep one boy from dying the way William did, maybe it'll mean something." "William's death wasn't pointless, Jake. It was tragic. There's a difference." Sam's voice was gentle but firm. "You're a good man trying to make up for something that wasn't your fault. But that boy in there, he's not William. He's Tommy. And he needs you to teach him, not use him to ease your guilt." "I know that." "Do you—" Sam stood, using his crutch for balance. "Because from where I sit, you're training a soldier, not raising a son. There's a difference there, too." He limped away, leaving Jake alone with his rifle and his thoughts, and the weight of choices made 15 years ago that still shaped everything he did. Inside the chapel, Grace knelt before the altar, hands folded in prayer. But the Winchester leaned against the pew beside her, loaded and ready. Faith and force coexisting in the same space, the same person. Tommy slept in the orphanage, exhausted from training, his hands blistered and his shoulder bruised. But his dreams, Jake hoped, free from the image of his uncle's body by the river. And somewhere south, in a camp by Willow Creek, Dutch Vanderberg planned his next move. 20 men, maybe more, were all sworn to a cause that died at Appomattox, but refused to stay buried. 48 hours, he'd said. 2 days until they returned with overwhelming force and the certainty of men who believed righteousness justified any action. Jake finished cleaning the Spencer, loaded it carefully, set it beside his bedroll. Tomorrow, they'd complete the fortifications, drill on fields of fire and reload procedures, prepare for siege as if preparation alone could change the mathematics of 6 defenders against 20 attackers. Outside, thunder rolled across the rangeland, promising rain before dawn. The storm clouds blocked the stars, turned the night dark as pitch. Jake stood at the window, watching lightning flicker on the horizon, and thought about Nashville, about holding a position against impossible odds because the alternative was worse than death, about making peace with the fact that good men would die so that better men could live, about the weight of command when every order meant blood and grief. He'd been good at it than making those decisions. Cold and clear and certain. He wasn't certain anymore. Wasn't sure of anything except that tomorrow would bring more training, more preparation, more waiting for violence that would come, whether they were ready or not. But he was still good at one thing: surviving. And he'd be damned if he'd let another boy die on his watch because he'd been too busy, too distracted, too guilt-ridden to teach him what he needed to know. The rain began just after midnight, steady and cold, washing blood from the river stones where 3 good men had died that morning. By dawn, it would be gone, dissolved into the Texas earth like it had never been. But Jake would remember. He always remembered. The dead had a way of staying with you, no matter how hard you tried to leave them behind. Dawn came gray and cold on the second day, with the promise of heat later. Jake had been awake since checking weapons and scanning the horizon through field glasses he'd carried since Chancellorsville. Old habits from countless mornings in hostile territory, when vigilance meant the difference between breakfast and burial. The rain had stopped sometime before midnight, leaving the Texas earth soft and the air clean. A good day for farming, his father would have said. Jake thought it looked like a good day for dying, but then most days did, when you were waiting for men with guns to decide your fate. Grace emerged from the small bedroom Mother Catherine had provided, already dressed and alert. Her shoulder wound was healing clean, no infection. A good sign. In this country, infection killed more people than bullets ever did. Anything moving out there? She asked, joining him at the window. Not yet, but they'll come when they're ready. Through the night, Jake had taught her advanced weapons handling, how to work the Colt revolver he'd given her, proper shotgun technique, reload procedures under pressure. She'd learned with the focused intensity of someone whose life hung in the balance, asking smart questions and remembering every answer. They'd spent hours strengthening their position too. Rifle pits dug behind strategic cover ammunition distributed at multiple locations, escape routes planned and memorized. Every window and doorway now commanded overlapping fields of fire. Basic military doctrine that had kept Jake breathing through 4 years of war. Vanderberg will test us first, Jake explained, adjusting the Spencer's rear sight for maximum accuracy. Probe our defenses, count our weapons, measure our resolve. Then he'll hit us where he thinks we're weakest. How can you be certain? Because it's what any good officer would do, and despite everything else, Dutch knows tactics. The morning stretched long and tense. Grace proved herself calm under pressure, checking ammunition counts and weapon conditions with methodical precision that would have impressed any drill sergeant. Tommy worked alongside Sam, learning to shape metal in the forge, while the old sergeant shared wisdom disguised as instruction. Steel must be forged in fire, Sam said, hammering hot iron into useful shape. Men too, the heat doesn't destroy. It reveals what was always there. I'm scared, Tommy admitted, voice barely audible over the ring of hammer on anvil. Scared of doing it wrong, scared of dying, scared of disappointing Captain Morrison. Fear means you're smart, Sam replied. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, boy. It's acting despite it. He paused in his work, fixed Tommy with eyes that had seen 2 wars and survived both. A man's worth isn't measured by his strength, but by what he protects. Around 10 o'clock, a single rider approached from the south. Jake recognized Sheriff Tom Bradley immediately, a man he'd known for 2 years as weak but generally honest. Bradley rode slowly, hands visible, a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. Jake, Bradley called from 100 yards out. Need to talk. Jake kept the Spencer ready, but didn't aim it directly at him. Ride up slow, Tom. Keep your hands where I can see them. Bradley dismounted at the porch rail, his face grim with unwelcome duty. He was a small man, soft around the middle, with thinning hair and eyes that never quite met yours when he spoke. The kind of man who became sheriff in towns where nothing much happened and nobody wanted the job. Jake, I've got a warrant for the girl. He pulled papers from his coat. Official charges of theft and conspiracy. What theft? 20,000 in gold missing from the Rekas ranch. Vanderberg filed a legal complaint, says he bought the property fair and square, and the gold was stolen. Grace appeared in the doorway, Winchester held across her chest. At the sight of Bradley's horse, her face went rigid with sudden recognition, color draining from her cheeks like water from a broken vessel. That's not Sheriff Bradley's horse, she said quietly, a voice tight with controlled fear. I recognize that brand. It's the same one the killers rode yesterday. Jake looked closer. The horse bore a distinctive mark burned into its left flank. V. Barbie Vanderberg's brand. The same mark he'd seen on the horses at Father Thomas's murder scene. Bradley had ridden here on a stolen animal, probably without thinking about what it revealed. Tom, Jake said carefully, his hand drifting toward the peacemaker. Whose horse is that? Bradley's hand dropped toward his gun, confirming every suspicion Jake had harbored since the sheriff appeared. The movement was jerky, uncertain, the motion of a man who'd practiced drawing, but never actually used a weapon in anger. Jake's draw was faster than conscious thought, the product of countless practice sessions and real gunfights where hesitation meant death. The peacemaker appeared in his hand like magic, firing before Bradley's fingers touched his grip. The .45 caliber round took the sheriff's center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed in the dust. His own pistol fell unfired from nerveless fingers, hitting the ground with dull thud that seemed too quiet for the moment. Bradley lay on his back, blood spreading across his shirt in a dark stain that grew with each struggling breath. Jake approached carefully, kicked the fallen weapon away, knelt beside the dying man. Stupid, Tom. Real stupid. Bradley coughed, blood flecking his lips. 500, he gasped. 500 per ranch cleared. County Commissioner Reed, he's in on it too. Land Office, Judge Calhoun. Another cough, weaker. Whole county bought. Vanderburg building empire. How many properties? 40 plus. 3 counties. Bradley's eyes were losing focus, staring at something Jake couldn't see. Sorry, Jake, needed the money. Wife's sick, kid's hungry. Thought one more wouldn't matter. He died with that excuse on his lips, gone between one breath and the next. Tommy stood frozen in the doorway, face pale. You killed the sheriff. I killed a man who was drawing on me, Jake corrected, reloading the peacemaker with swift efficiency. There's a difference, Sam limped over to study the body with a veteran's dispassion. Boy, there's a difference between murder and execution. Bradley chose his side when he took Vanderburg's money. Captain Morrison just collected the debt. But Tommy's hands were shaking. Jake noticed. The boy had seen his uncle murdered, watched men die in the distance, but this was different. This was close. This was personal. This was the reality of violence when you could see the light fade from a man's eyes. Come here, Jake said, not unkindly. He waited until Tommy approached, then spoke quietly. Law isn't always justice, son. Sometimes men have to do what courts can't. Bradley was corrupt, working for killers, came here to arrest Grace on false charges. I gave him a choice. He made it. That's all there is. Does it get easier? Tommy asked. Killing? No, Jake said honestly. It gets familiar. That's worse. Grace examined Bradley's saddlebags, found documents that told the full story. Forged deeds, transfer papers with false signatures, a ledger listing properties seized and payments made. The corruption ran deep, involved dozens of officials across 3 counties. Vanderburg's not just stealing land, Grace said, spreading papers across the porch. He's building a legal framework to legitimize it, making his empire look official. Jake studied the documents, his tactical mind processing implications. This wasn't a simple land grab. This was systematic conquest using law as a weapon more effective than rifles. By the time federal authorities caught on, Vanderburg would control enough territory to claim sovereignty, maybe even international recognition from Confederate sympathizers in Europe. We need to warn the marshal, Sam said. Let Austin know how deep this goes. Already did, Jake replied. Sent a rider yesterday with a full report. But help's still 3 days away minimum. We're on our own until then. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about defending one mission. It was about stopping a cancer that had infected the entire region, turning law itself into an instrument of theft and murder. So what do we do? Tommy asked. Same thing we planned, Jake said. Fortify, prepare, survive. But now we know we're not just fighting bandits, we're fighting a system. He looked at Grace. That gold. It's not just money for a hospital wing. It's evidence Vanderburg's operation isn't legitimate. That's why he wants it so bad. The afternoon brought intensive training. Jake worked with both Grace and Tommy, drilling them on tactics that might keep them alive when the shooting started. Firing from cover isn't about hiding, he explained, positioning them behind sandbags. It's about creating angles your enemy can't exploit. See how this position covers the gate but exposes you to the east wall? That's a death trap. You need overlapping fields with no blind approaches. Tommy absorbed everything with fierce concentration, his earlier fear transmuting into determination. The boy had good instincts, Jake had to admit, natural sense of terrain and tactics that couldn't be taught, only refined. Grace proved surprisingly adept with the Winchester. Her medical training gave her steady hands and the ability to focus under pressure. By mid-afternoon, she could hit man-sized targets at 100 yards reload in under 10 seconds transition between positions without exposing herself to imaginary enemy fire. You're a natural, Jake told her during a water break. I dissect bodies for medical training, Grace replied. Similar muscle control, precision work. Shooting paper and shooting men are different things, Jake cautioned. I understand, Captain, but when men come to murder children, I'll do what's necessary. As the sun began its descent, Jake found himself alone with Tommy on the chapel wall, teaching the boy to read terrain like a military map. See that arroyo? Jake pointed to a dry creek bed 300 yards south. Perfect approach for infantry. Can't see it from here because of the angle, but men could crawl right up to our walls using it for cover. So we put someone watching it. Smart. Where would you position them? Tommy studied the ground, eyes moving over the landscape the way Jake had taught him. The old well foundation there, elevated position, clear line of sight to the arroyo mouth. Anybody coming up that route, we'd see them before they got close. Good thinking, Jake said and meant it. The boy was learning faster than Jake had expected, asking the right questions, seeing patterns that took most soldiers months to recognize. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the day fade. Finally, Tommy spoke. Captain Morrison, why are you helping the mission? You don't even believe in God. I believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves. Like William, Jake turned surprised. Sam told you? He said you had a son who died. Said that's why you're so hard on me sometimes. Not because you're mean, but because you care too much. Jake was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth a 14-year-old could handle. Finally, he decided on all of it. The boy deserved that much. William was smart kid, good instincts, a lot like you, actually. But I was always busy, building the ranch, making money, planning for tomorrow. Never took time to teach him what he needed to know. Jake's voice was steady, reciting facts. Mountain lion got him while he was checking traps alone. I found him 3 hours later. Too late. That's not your fault, sir. It is, though. If I'd taught him proper tracking, proper awareness, he'd have seen the signs. Would have known to climb a tree, fire warning shot, something. Tommy was quiet, processing this. Then my Uncle Thomas used to say God doesn't give us more than we can handle, that everything happens for a reason. Your uncle was a good man, but I'm not sure I believe that. Me neither, Tommy admitted. Not anymore. But I think maybe bad things happen so we can stop them from happening again. Like you teaching me so I don't end up like William. Out of the mouths of children, Jake thought. Sometimes wisdom came from unexpected sources. If we survive this, Tommy said quietly, would you teach me ranching, like really teach me everything you know? Jake felt something shift in his chest, ice cracking around a heart he'd thought frozen solid. If we survive this, son, I'll teach you everything I should have taught William. They shook hands on it, solemn as a legal contract, and Jake realized Sam was right. He'd been seeing Tommy as a replacement for William, a chance to correct past failures. But the boy sitting beside him wasn't a ghost or a second chance. He was just Tommy, 14 years old and scared and brave and deserving of his own life, his own future. Thank you, sir, Tommy said. Call me Jake, Morrison replied. We're partners now. Partners use first names. That night, Jake sat with Sam on the chapel steps, both men nursing coffee and watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Heard you made a deal with the boy, Sam said. News travels fast. Small mission, not much travels slow. Sam pulled out his flask, added whiskey to his coffee. You sure about this, taking on another son after what happened to William? I'm not taking on a son, Jake said. I'm teaching a student. Same thing eventually. Maybe. Jake accepted the flask, added a measure to his own cup. But I can't let another boy die because his father figure was too busy to prepare him. If that makes me selfish, so be it. Not selfish, human. Sam drank, savoring the burn. We're old soldiers, Jake. We've killed, we've won, we've survived, when better men didn't. Our legacy isn't the battles we won. It's the boys we saved from having to fight them. When'd you get so philosophical? 62 years old, lost a leg at Nashville, buried 3 wives, seen enough to know what matters. Sam gestured with his cup at the mission building. Well, this place, these people, that boy learning to be a man, that matters more than all the acres you own or cattle you raise. Jake knew he was right. He'd spent 2 years building walls around his grief, focusing on work because work didn't require feeling. But Tommy and Grace and Sam had breached those walls, reminded him that isolation wasn't strength. It was just another kind of death. The attack came at dawn on the 3rd day, just as Jake had predicted. 15 men crested the ridge to the north, moving in coordinated military formation. No attempt at stealth or surprise. This was a show of force designed to intimidate, to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Positions, Jake called, his voice calm, despite adrenaline singing in his veins. This was the moment all their preparation had been building toward. This was where theory became blood and bullets. Tommy took his assigned station at the east wall Winchester, loaded hands steady, despite the fear Jake could see in his eyes. Grace moved to the west position, checking her own rifle with the thoroughness of a surgeon preparing instruments. Sam positioned himself at the forge window elevated angle, giving him clear sight lines across the entire approach. Mother Catherine and two other nuns retreated to the chapel interior, ready to provide medical aid. Jake climbed to the chapel roof, Spencer rifle ready. From here, he could see everything direct fire like a conductor leading an orchestra of controlled violence. The attackers advanced at a walk professional spacing that prevented grouped fire from being effective. They knew their business. These weren't cowboys or bandits. These were soldiers who'd learned their trade in places where mistakes were measured in body counts. At 200 yards, Jake called down, "Hold fire. Let them come closer." At 100 yards, he could see faces. Young men, mostly late 20s to early 30s. Old enough to have fought in the war, young enough to believe another one was worth fighting. They carried Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers, wore the remnants of Confederate uniforms like badges of honor. At 50 yards, Jake shouted, "Fire!" The Spencer bucked against his shoulder, the familiar recoil solid and certain. His first shot took the lead rider in the chest, tumbling the man from his saddle. His horse screamed and crashed into the formation behind him, creating chaos. Below, Grace's Winchester cracked in steady rhythm. She fired 3 times in quick succession, each shot deliberate and controlled. 2 hits, 1 miss. Not bad for someone who'd learned to shoot 2 days ago. Tommy's rifle spoke next, the lever, action working frantically. His first 3 shots went wide, panic making him jerk the trigger. Jake wanted to correct him, but couldn't spare attention from his own targets. Sam's weapon joined the chorus, firing from the forge window with the steady precision of a man who'd done this before. Each of his shots found their mark, dropping attackers with efficient brutality. The battle lasted 22 minutes, though it felt like hours. Time compressed and expanded in combat, stretched thin by adrenaline and fear. Jake worked through his targets methodically, the Spencer's 7-round capacity limiting him to careful shot selection. Grace proved herself steady under fire. After her initial nervousness passed, she fell into a rhythm, shooting and reloading with mechanical efficiency. Jake watched her drop 2 more men, saw her pause to vomit after the second kill, then returned to her rifle without hesitation. Tommy struggled. His shots were wild, driven by fear more than training, but he kept firing, kept working the lever action, kept trying. That counted for something. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was continuing despite it. The attackers retreated after losing 4 dead and 3 wounded. The mathematics of warfare were simple. No objective was worth 50% casualties. They pulled back to regroup, leaving bodies in the dust and blood in the dirt. The silence after gunfire was always jarring. Jake's ears rang from the Spencer's report, the familiar high-pitched whine that came after sustained fire. He descended from the roof, checking positions, assessing damage. Sister Maria, one of the younger nuns, had taken a bullet through her upper arm, the round grazing muscle but missing bone. Grace was already treating it, applying pressure and carbolic acid with steady hands despite tears streaming down her face. "I killed them," Grace whispered, voice breaking. "I actually killed them." "You saved lives," Sister Maria said through gritted teeth, her own face pale with pain. "Mine included. Thank God for you, Sister Grace." Mother Catherine knelt beside them, her face grave but composed. "Child, what you did was necessary. Do not let guilt cloud the truth. You protected the innocent." But Jake saw Grace's hands shaking as she bandaged the wound, saw the psychological cost of crossing that line from healer to killer. She'd need time to process it, time they might not have. Tommy sat against the east wall, rifle abandoned beside him, face pale. Jake approached carefully. "How many?" the boy asked without looking up. "How many what? How many did I kill? Does it matter?" "Yes." Tommy's voice was hollow. "I need to know." Jake knelt beside him. "I don't know, son. Combat's confused. Hard to tell who shot what. But you did your duty. Held your position. That's what matters. I threw up after. Twice. So did Grace. So did I my first battle." Jake put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Being sick doesn't mean you did wrong. Means you're human. Men who enjoy killing, they're the ones you need to worry about." "Will it get easier?" "Familiar," Jake corrected. "Not easier, familiar." Sam joined them, his own rifle smoking from sustained fire. "Good work, both of you. Tommy, your shooting was wild, but you held your nerve. That's half the battle right there." "What's the other half?" Tommy asked. "Living with it after." Jake checked their ammunition. They'd expended roughly 60 rounds total. Against 15 attackers, that was acceptable. But if Vanderberg came back with his full force, 20 or more men, the mathematics changed significantly. We can't hold them off indefinitely, Sam said quietly, reading Jake's thoughts. Not with these odds. Marshal Thompson should be here in 2 days, maybe 3 if he ran into weather. That's a long time when men are shooting at you. Jake nodded, already calculating. They had maybe 400 rounds remaining across all weapons. Against 20 attackers mounting sustained assault, that gave them perhaps 2 more engagements before ammunition became critical. 2 more battles to survive. That evening, as storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, Vanderberg's messenger arrived under white flag. A single rider, hands visible, carrying terms for surrender. Colonel Vanderberg offers one final chance, the messenger called. Sister Grace in the gold location in exchange for Mother Catherine Harper's life and Captain Morrison's safe passage. Grace stepped forward before Jake could stop her. What do you mean, Mother Catherine's life? She's here, she's safe. The messenger smiled without humor. Not anymore. The colonel's men intercepted her on the road this morning. She was traveling to neighboring town for medical supplies. Careless in wartime. Jake felt cold settle in his stomach. They'd been so focused on defending the mission, they hadn't considered Vanderberg might strike elsewhere. Classic military tactics. Pin the enemy in place, strike their weak points. Mother Catherine had slipped away during the chaos of treating the wounded, determined to fetch proper medical supplies from the town 8 miles north. She'd taken the risk, thinking the mission was secure. Now she'd paid for that decision. Proof, he demanded. Show me proof she's alive. The messenger tossed something that landed in the dust at Jake's feet. Mother Catherine's rosary, the one she never removed, the wooden beads worn smooth by decades of prayer. 24 hours, the messenger said. Tomorrow at noon, make your choice. He rode away before anyone could respond, leaving them with impossible mathematics. Trade one life for another, surrender everything they'd fought to protect, or watch a good woman die. Grace turned to Jake, eyes desperate. I have to go. I can't let her die for me. The moment you leave this mission, you are both dead, Jake replied. Vanderberg doesn't honor agreements, never has. Then what choice do we have? We go get her, Sam said quietly. Tonight, before Vanderberg expects it. Jake studied his old friend. Outnumbered 3-1 in their territory. Poor odds even for us. You've done worse. Remember Chattanooga? That was 30 years ago. The principles haven't changed. Jake turned to Grace. Where would he hold her? Vanderberg's camp? You said it's by Willow Creek. 5 miles south, Cottonwood Grove. I saw it when I fled the massacre. Grace's face was set with determination Jake recognized. The same look Rebecca had worn when she'd insisted on traveling to Austin despite his warnings. The look of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. I need to come, she said. Jake shook his head. Not the way I'm thinking. Listen to me. He pulled her aside, spoke quietly so only she could hear. I'm going in alone. Silent infiltration, cut her loose, slip out. But I need insurance. I need someone on high ground with a rifle who can cover me if it goes wrong. You want me to provide covering fire? Exactly. There's a ridge overlooking their camp. You get up there with the Winchester, set up a good position. If I get Mother Catherine out quiet, you never fire a shot. But if they catch me, if it turns into a fight, you open up from above. Create chaos. Give us a chance to escape. Grace considered this. How will I know when to shoot? You'll know. Trust your training. If you see them surround me, if you hear shouting, start shooting. Aim for center mass like I taught you. Keep firing until I signal or we're clear. She nodded slowly. I can do that. You sure this isn't like defending the mission? You'll be alone up there. No one to help if something goes wrong. I understand, Captain, but it's better than sitting here while Mother Catherine dies. They prepared as darkness fell, applying war paint with mud and charcoal dressing in black clothing that would disappear in the night. Jake showed Grace the best route to the ridge, marked it on a rough map. You leave 15 minutes before me, he said. Move quiet, get into position. Wait for me to make my move. And Grace, he gripped her shoulder. If this goes bad and I don't make it out, you run. Get back to the mission. Tell Sam and Tommy what happened. Don't try to be a hero. What if they're torturing you? What if you need help? Then you shoot until your ammunition runs out and you run anyway. Those orphans need you alive more than they need me dead. Understood. She nodded reluctantly. Tommy watched them prepare, face tight with emotions Jake couldn't read. Finally, the boy spoke. "Please bring her back, sir." "We will," Jake promised, knowing it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "And if you don't come back either," Jake looked at Sam, "then you'll hold this mission until Marshal Thompson arrives. You're in command, Tommy. You and Sam. Defend these people. That's the mission." Tommy straightened, accepting the weight of responsibility. "Yes, sir." He saluted, crisp and formal, the gesture of a boy trying hard to be a man. Jake returned it, seeing something in that moment he'd never expected to feel again. Pride. Not the bitter kind that came from accomplishment or acquisition, but the simple pride a father felt watching his son stand tall when everything was falling apart. "Take care of yourself, boy," Jake said. "You too, Pa." The word hung in the air between them. Pa. Not sir, not Captain Morrison, not Jake. Pa. The title William had used, the one Jake thought he'd never hear again. He gripped Tommy's shoulder once too moved to speak, then turned to find Grace waiting with weapons and determination written across her face. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." They slipped into the Texas night, leaving behind walls and weapons and a 14-year-old boy who'd called him Pa for the first time, carrying the weight of that trust-like armor into darkness, where men waited to kill them. The mission bell rang vespers as they disappeared, sound carrying across the rangeland like a prayer for their safe return. Behind them, Tommy and Sam stood, watch rifles ready, guarding the living against the dead who refused to stay buried. The war that should have ended 15 years ago rode on through the Texas night, searching for a conclusion written in blood and fire and the terrible mathematics of survival. The Texas night swallowed them whole. Jake and Grace moved through darkness so complete that the stars overhead seemed impossibly bright by comparison. Diamond chips scattered across black velvet. 5 miles to Vanderberg's camp. 5 miles of open country where a single mistake, a single sound meant death for them and Mother Catherine both. They traveled together for the first 2 miles, Jake setting a brutal pace that Grace somehow matched. Most women he'd known couldn't have managed half this distance at this speed. But then most women hadn't been raised by an Irish priest who'd served as a scout in the Mexican War. "Father Thomas taught you well," Jake said softly as they paused at a dry creek bed. "He said a woman alone in this country needed to protect herself." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Taught me to move quiet, read signs, survive." They crossed the creek bed using the depression for cover. The moon was a silver crescent, providing just enough light to navigate but not enough to expose them. Perfect conditions for infiltration. Jake had done this before at Vicksburg at Cold Harbor, slipping through Confederate lines to gather intelligence or sabotage supplies. But he'd been 26 then, full of youth and certainty. Now he was 40, carrying old wounds and older grief, wondering if his body could still do what his mind remembered. 2 miles out, they spotted the first sentinel. Confederate picket posted on a small rise rifle across his knees, smoking a cigarette that glowed like a beacon in the darkness. Jake pointed and Grace nodded, understanding. They circled wide, giving the man 50 yards clearance, moving slow as shadows. Half a mile further, Jake stopped. The cottonwood grove was visible ahead, darker shapes against dark sky. This was where they separated. "The ridge is there," Jake whispered, pointing to an elevated position overlooking the camp from the east. "See it?" Grace studied the terrain, memorizing the approach. "I see it. Give me 15 minutes once you're in position. I'll approach from the west, use the trees for cover. You watch. If things go quiet, if I get her out clean, you'll see us slip away. Don't move, don't fire, just let us go. And if it goes wrong, you'll know. They'll be shouting, shooting, running. That's when you open fire. Aim for the men around me first, then anyone who looks like they're organizing a response. Create chaos. Make them think they're surrounded. How many shots should I take?" "As many as you need until I signal. I'll wave my hat 3 times when we're clear. Then you get down from that ridge and head back to the mission. Don't wait for me. Don't try to find me. Just go." Grace gripped her Winchester tighter. "Captain, what if they kill you?" "Then you've done your duty and you go home." Jake's voice was firm but not unkind. "Tommy needs you. Those orphans need you. Don't throw your life away trying to save a dead man." She started to protest, but he cut her off. "Listen to me, Grace. You're brave. Braver than most soldiers I've commanded. But bravery without wisdom gets good people killed. If I fall, you survive. That's an order." She nodded reluctantly. 15 minutes once I'm in position. Good, now go. Move quiet, and Grace. He paused. Thank you. For everything. She disappeared into the darkness, moving like smoke toward the ridge. Jake waited, counting seconds, giving her time to get into position. The night sounds continued around him. Crickets, distant coyotes whined through sagebrush. Normal sounds, no alarm. 15 minutes later, Jake began his approach. He moved through the cottonwoods like death itself, every step calculated, every breath controlled. The Bowie knife rode loose in his belt, 14 inches of steel, sharp enough to shave with. His peacemaker was loaded but holstered. The Spencer stayed on his back, useless for this kind of work, but necessary for the escape. Through the trees ahead, he saw firelight, heard low voices, counted horses picketed on the north side. 12 mounts, meaning at least 12 men, probably more. Vanderburg had set up a proper military camp, sentries posted at regular intervals, sleeping men organized by section. Professional soldiering, the kind that got good men killed if you underestimated it. Jake circled wide, approaching from the west, where the trees were thickest. He spotted Mother Catherine tied to a wagon wheel in the camp center, head down, either sleeping or unconscious. 2 guards sat nearby, one alert, one dozing. Beyond them, 6 tents arranged in military formation. Men sleeping inside, weapons stacked close. Vanderburg's tent stood apart, Confederate battle flag hanging limp in the still air. 4 sentries on the perimeter, 2 with Mother Catherine, 3 around the central fire. 9 men awake. That left 11 sleeping, but they could wake and join the fight in seconds. Bad odds, worse than Nashville. But Jake had faced worse. The trick was speed and silence. Get in, cut her loose, get out before anyone knew what happened. He took the first sentry from behind, approaching downwind where the man's cigarette smoke masked any scent. The guard was young, maybe 22, attentioning on the camp. Never heard Jake coming. The Bowie knife found the space between his ribs, angled upward into the heart. Death came in seconds, silent and complete. Jake lowered the body slowly, checking for weapons. A newer Colt revolver, well maintained. He took it, added it to his arsenal. The second sentry was more alert, scanning the darkness with professional wariness. But he was watching for groups, for noise, not for a single man who moved like shadow through shadow. Jake used a tree as cover, closed the distance, struck from behind. His hand covered the man's mouth as the blade severed his spinal cord. Instant death, no sound. 2 down, 7 alert enemies remaining, plus 11 sleeping. The third sentry was smoking the glow visible from 50 yards. Fatal carelessness. Jake approached from the blind side, used the same technique. Hand over mouth, steel between ribs, upward, thrust at 45 degrees. The body went still in his arms. 3 sentries dead, 6 men still awake in camp. Jake crawled toward Mother Catherine's position, using scattered equipment for cover. Ammunition crates, water barrels, saddles. His mind cataloged everything, planning escape routes, counting enemies, measuring distances. The guard nearest Mother Catherine had dozed off at his post rifle across his knees, chin on chest. Bad discipline. Jake rose behind him like a ghost, dispatched him with the Bowie knife. Clean, quiet, professional. His partner noticed the movement, started to turn, mouth opening, to shout. Jake's thrown knife caught him in the throat. Not his best throw, but adequate. The man went down gurgling, unable to make sound, drowning in his own blood. 5 guards dead, 4 men still awake around the central fire, plus 11 sleeping. Jake cut Mother Catherine's bonds with quick strokes. Her eyes widened with recognition and desperate hope. Captain Morrison, thank God. Can you walk? Jake whispered. Yes. They hurt me, broke ribs, I think, but I can move. He helped her stand, supporting her weight with one arm while keeping his Bowie knife ready in the other. They'd taken 3 steps toward the tree line when a voice stopped them cold. Did you really think I wouldn't expect this, Captain? Dutch Vanderburg stepped from his tent, revolver drawn and cocked. 6 more men emerged from concealment, rifles aimed. They'd been awake the whole time, waiting in the darkness, using Mother Catherine as bait. Elaborate trap. Vanderburg had anticipated the rescue attempt, positioned his forces accordingly, waited for Jake to commit before springing it. He'd walk straight into it like a green recruit on his first patrol. 4 years fighting Yankees taught me how you think, Morrison. Vanderburg continued, his voice carrying that same arrogant certainty Jake remembered from Nashville. Predictable as sunrise. The righteous Union officer can't resist saving the innocent. Jake's hand moved toward his peacemaker, but 6 weapons against 1 made poor odds. Mother Catherine stood frozen beside him, her face pale in the firelight. Let the women go, Dutch. Your quarrel's with me. My quarrel is with everything you represent, Vanderburg replied. Union victory, federal authority, the death of my world. His eyes glittered with fanatic intensity. You destroyed everything at Nashville. Tonight the South gets its revenge. Gunfire erupted from the ridge above. Grace's Winchester cracked with deadly precision, exactly as they'd planned. She had the high ground clear of fields of fire and the element of surprise. Her first shot took the man closest to Vanderburg. Her second dropped another. Her third sent the rest diving for cover. Strategic brilliance. Jake had taught her well. Vanderburg's men scattered as bullets chewed the ground where they had been standing. Jake dove behind a supply wagon, pulling Mother Catherine with him. His peacemaker appeared in his hand, controlled fire-aimed shots maximum efficiency. First shot killed the man aiming at Mother Catherine. Second shot wounded the one flanking left. Third dropped the man rushing his position. He reloaded with battlefield speed, fingers working from trained instinct. The camp descended into chaos. Men running, shouting, dying. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like summer lightning. Jake worked through his opponents, systematically using the equipment and terrain for protection. From the ridge, Grace's Winchester continued its deadly work. She was shooting with surgical precision, now each round deliberate and effective. Her training had taken root muscle memory, overriding moral hesitation. Jake counted 3 more men falling to her accurate fire. A Confederate veteran rose from behind barrel's rifle aimed at Jake's position. Jake's shot was faster, taking the man in the shoulder and spinning him into the dirt. Morrison, Vanderburg's voice closer now, furious with desperation. Jake switched to the Spencer, working the lever, chambering rounds, finding targets. 2 men fell at 150 yards. Grace's fire from above was devastating, forcing Vanderburg's men to fight in multiple directions. Vanderburg's return fire was coordinated but ineffective. Fighting enemies in 2 directions divided their accuracy. Jake counted bodies. 5 men dead, 3 wounded and fleeing. That left Vanderburg, and maybe 4 others, still combat effective. The mathematics were improving. A bullet splintered wood beside Jake's head, sending fragments into his cheek. He shifted position, using cover, put a 56 caliber round through the shooter's chest. The man spun and dropped. The surviving soldiers began to break. Confederate discipline crumbling under sustained assault from 2 directions. 3 more ran for the horses, desperate to escape. Grace's Winchester spoke again, dropping one. The other 2 made it to their mounts and disappeared into darkness. That left Vanderburg alone in the wreckage of his ambush. Enough. Vanderburg stepped into the firelight, hands empty, Confederate pride intact despite defeat. Enough killing Morrison, you and me, face to face like it should have been 13 years ago. Jake stood slowly, the warm peacemaker heavy in his hand. Blood ran down his cheek from the wood splinters mixing with sweat and gun smoke residue. You sure about this, Dutch? We can end it here. Walk away. I've been certain for 13 years, Vanderburg replied. His voice carried the weight of obsession of a man who'd built his entire existence around a single purpose. You took everything. My country, my cause, my future, my men. You destroyed those things yourself, Jake said steadily, the moment you chose revenge over reconciliation. But even as he spoke, Jake saw something in Vanderburg's face that gave him pause. Not just hatred, not just fanaticism, pain. The kind of deep, bone-grinding pain that came from losses too great to process. You know what I went home to after Appomattox? Vanderburg's voice cracked slightly. Plantation burned to foundations. Wife dead from cholera. 3 sons, ages 8, 10, and 12, buried beside her in graves I'd never seen. Jake felt something twist in his chest. He understood loss, understood grief that poisoned everything it touched. Everything I'd fought for died for gone, turned to ash and empty graves. Vanderburg's eyes held a terrible clarity. The Union promised justice, delivered carpetbaggers and corruption, took our land, our dignity, our future. I'm sorry for your losses, Dutch, Jake said, meaning it. War costs everyone. But your cause was slavery, keeping human beings in chains that deserved to die. I never owned slaves, Morrison. Most of us didn't. We fought because the North invaded, because federal authority trampled states' rights, because we believed in self-determination. Vanderburg's voice rose. Those men at Nashville died for principles you'll never understand. They died for a lie, Jake countered. A lie wrapped in honor and tradition and everything that sounds noble until you strip away the coating and see the rot underneath. Easy for the winner to moralize, Captain. Vanderburg's laugh was bitter. You sit on 2,000 acres you took from Mexico in 46. How's that different from what I'm doing? The question hit harder than Jake expected. How was it different? He'd claimed land through force of arms, through a war of conquest, dressed up as manifest destiny. The same justifications, the same violence, just wearing different flags. You ever wonder if you're on the right side of history? Vanderburg asked. Every damn day, Dutch. Every day since Nashville. Jake's voice was quiet but firm. But I know I'm on the right side today, because today I'm protecting orphans and nuns. You're threatening them. That's the difference between us. I'm protecting the next generation, Vanderburg protested. Building a place where Southern families who lost everything can start over, where our values, our traditions, our way of life can survive. By stealing from Mexican ranchers, by murdering priests. Jake shook his head. That's not building, Dutch. That's just another kind of destruction. What choice did they leave us? Vanderburg's voice was desperate now, a man trying to justify the unjustifiable. The North destroyed our economy, freed our labor force, carpetbagged our governments. We had nothing left but land, and they were taking that too through taxes and regulations. So you became what you claimed to hate, a thief and a killer. I became what I had to become to protect what's mine. Those orphans at the mission aren't yours, Jake said. That gold isn't yours. Mother Catherine's life isn't yours to take. You're not protecting anything, Dutch. You're just destroying in a different uniform. Vanderburg was silent for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. Pain and pride and the terrible recognition that maybe possibly he'd become the thing he'd spent 13 years fighting against. Then his hand dropped toward his ornate LeMat revolver. One bullet, Vanderburg said. You and me, officer to officer, the way it should have ended at Nashville. From the ridge, Grace shouted, Don't, Captain, it's a trap. Some things need finishing, sister, Jake called, buying. He holstered the peacemaker, stepped into the clearing, hands visible. Vanderburg moved to match him, 20 feet of open ground between them. Firelight flickered across both their faces, painting them in shades of copper and shadow. Two men who'd been young together at the start of a war, now old before their time, facing each other across a divide no bullet could bridge. Should have killed you at Nashville when I had the chance, Vanderburg said. You tried, Dutch. You failed. Story of your life. Jake's voice was calm, almost gentle. Brave charges into prepared positions. Grand gestures that cost more than they gained. You fought with honor, I'll give you that. But honor without wisdom is just expensive stupidity. And you fought with what cold calculation, heartless efficiency. I fought to end it, Jake replied. You fought to continue it. That's why I'm still standing and you're about to die. Vanderburg's hand trembled slightly on his gun. Rage and age and the weight of 13 years carrying hatred like a millstone. Jake remained still, calm, iron discipline that had kept him alive through 4 years of war and 15 years of peace. The draw came faster than thought. Vanderburg's hand dropped to the LeMat revolver, ornate weapon, with 9-shot cylinder, heavier and slower than standard issue, but deadly at close range. His fingers found the grip, started the pull. Jake's draw was lightning. Pure muscle memory, thousands of hours of practice compressed into one smooth motion. The peacemaker appeared in his hand like magic hammerback, sight picture, acquired trigger pressed. The .45 caliber round left the barrel before Vanderburg's weapon cleared leather. It took him center mass, just left of the sternum, punching through ribs and lung and heart. Perfect shot, instant kill, the kind of marksmanship that came from talent and training and cold necessity. Vanderburg staggered backward, the LeMat falling from nerveless fingers. He looked down at the spreading blood, then back at Jake with something like surprise. As if even now, even dying, he couldn't quite believe he'd lost. You never understood what we fought for. He gasped, blood flecking his lips. I understood perfectly, Dutch, Jake said, lowering the peacemaker. That's why I fought against it. Vanderburg collapsed to his knees, the Confederate flag behind him stirring in wind that carried the smell of gun smoke and death. His eyes found Jake's one last time. My sons, I just wanted to give them what they lost. Your sons are dead, Dutch. Have been for 13 years. This wasn't for them. It was for you, for pride and rage and the part of yourself you couldn't let die with them. Vanderburg opened his mouth to respond, but only blood came out. He fell forward, hands still gripping unfired weapon, dying as he'd lived. A Confederate officer who couldn't accept that some wars end and some causes die. Jake stood over the body feeling nothing but weariness. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the hollow emptiness that came after violence. Another man dead, another life ended. The mathematics of survival playing out in blood and bullets like they always did. Grace descended from the ridge, Winchester still smoking. Her face was pale, eyes wide with shock and aftermath. She'd killed 5 men tonight, crossed lines she'd never imagined crossing, become something she'd sworn never to be. It's finished, Jake said quietly. It's over. Mother Catherine emerged from behind the wagon where Jake had hidden her during the firefight. The older woman's face was bruised, her ribs broken, but she was alive. That counted for something in the calculus of this night. The 3 surviving Vanderburg men had fled into darkness, leaving weapons and supplies behind. With their colonel dead and their cause revealed as hollow theft dressed in Confederate gray, they had no reason to die for land they'd never own. Jake gathered Mother Catherine and Grace. Can you ride? I can do whatever's necessary. Mother Catherine replied, her voice steady despite pain. They took 3 horses from Vanderburg's string-good animals that hadn't asked to serve bad causes. The ride back to the mission took 2 hours, slow and careful. Grace and Mother Catherine riding while Jake walked alongside with weapons ready, watching for ambush that never came. The first light of dawn was breaking when they crested the final ridge and saw St. Michael's Mission below. Intact, defended, waiting. Tommy and Sam stood at the gates, rifles ready, watching their approach. When they recognized the riders, both men lowered their weapons. Relief washed across Tommy's face so clearly Jake could see it even from a distance. The boy had held the mission through the long night while Jake had been away. Done what needed doing without supervision or support. That was courage. That was character. They rode through the gates to cheers from the nuns. Mother Catherine was immediately surrounded. Her injuries examined, her safe return celebrated. Jake dismounted slowly, every muscle aching. 40 years old and feeling 60 after a night of infiltration and combat. Sam approached, concern clear in his weathered features. You look like hell, Jake. Feel worse. Jake handed over the reins. But it's done. Vanderburg's dead. His operation's broken. The boy did good, Sam said quietly. Held the mission all night. Cool as ice, smart as a veteran. You trained him well. Tommy appeared then, face anxious. Pa, you okay? There it was again. Pa. The word that meant more than Jake wanted to admit. He pulled the boy into an embrace, ignoring the ache in his ribs. I'm fine, son. You did good. Real good. I was so scared, Tommy confessed. Thought you might not come back. Takes more than Dutch Vanderburg to kill me, Jake said, trying for lightness. I've got too much left to teach you. Grace stood apart, still holding her Winchester, tears streaming down her face. Mother Catherine approached her, gathered her into gentle arms despite her own injuries. Child, what you did tonight, that was love. Hard love, terrible love, but love nonetheless. I killed them, Mother. 5 men. I murdered them. You saved us, Mother Catherine corrected. Saved me, saved Captain Morrison, saved this mission and everyone in it. That's not murder. That's sacrifice. But Jake saw Grace's hands shaking, saw the cost written across her face. She'd need time to reconcile what she'd done with who she'd been. He knew that struggle, had lived it every day since the war ended. The sun rose over the Texas rangeland, painting everything gold and red and beautiful. Another day beginning, and another chance to build instead of destroy. But the dead were still dead, and the living still had to figure out how to keep going. 5 days later, Federal Marshal William Thompson arrived from Austin with 12 deputies. They arrested Commissioner Harlan Reed, Land Clerk Samuel Webb, Judge Morrison Calhoun, and 6 other corrupt officials. Vanderburg's network was exposed, his stolen properties returned to their rightful owners. The gold remained at the mission, secure and legitimate. Justice had come to Texas slow, but certain as sunrise. Jake stood at the mission gates watching the orphans play in the courtyard. Grace had become their protector, a warrior nun who wore her Winchester as naturally as her rosary. She taught the girls to defend themselves, showed them strength didn't mean abandoning faith. Tommy worked beside Sam in the forge, learning metalwork and wisdom in equal measure. The boy had grown in the weeks since the siege, shoulders, broader voice, deeper eyes carrying the weight of a man who'd seen violence and survived. "You leaving soon?" Sam asked, joining Jake at the gates. "Tomorrow. Ranch won't run itself." "And the boy," Jake smiled, "he's coming with me, going to teach him ranching. Everything I should have taught William. You're taking him in officially." "Officially. Papers are being drawn up. Thomas Brennan Morrison." Jake paused. "If he wants it." "He wants it," Sam said. "Kid hasn't stopped talking about your ranch for 3 days." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the mission come alive with the sounds of children and hope. The war that should have ended 15 years ago was finally truly finished. The dead could rest. The living could build. "Jake," Sam said quietly, "you did good here, saved more than lives, saved futures." "We all did," Jake corrected. "You, Grace, Tommy, even Mother Catherine with her stubborn faith." He looked at his old friend. "What about you? You staying at the mission? For now, these kids need someone to teach them metalwork. Besides, where else would a one-legged old soldier go?" "You're always welcome at the ranch." "I know, but my place is here." Sam gripped Jake's shoulder. "Go teach that boy what you know. Make sure he doesn't make the same mistakes we did." That evening, Jake found Tommy practicing with the Winchester in the courtyard. The boy's form was good stance, solid, breathing controlled. He'd learned well. "Tommy," Jake called. "Got a minute?" The boy set down the rifle, came over eagerly. "Yes, sir. Wanted to talk to you about something, about the future." Jake hesitated, then plunged ahead. "How would you feel about coming to live at the ranch, learning the business, working alongside me?" "I'd like to—" He paused, finding the words harder than he'd expected. "I'd like to adopt you, officially, if you're willing." Tommy's eyes went wide. "You mean it really?" "Really, you'd be Thomas Brennan Morrison, my son-in-law, and fact." The boy threw his arms around Jake, squeezing tight. "Yes, yes, I want that more than anything." Jake returned the embrace, feeling ice melt around his heart. He'd failed William, failed to teach him, failed to protect him, failed to be the father his son deserved. But maybe, just maybe, he could do better with Tommy. Not to replace William, never that, but to honor him. To take the lessons learned in grief and turn them into something worth having. To teach this boy everything he knew, everything he'd learned, everything that mattered. To leave a legacy that wasn't measured in acres or cattle or gold, but in the man this boy would become. That night, as stars appeared one by one over the Texas plains, Jake sat with Mother Catherine in the chapel. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for saving us, protecting us, giving us a future." "You gave me something too," Jake replied. "Purpose, a reason to remember that some things are worth fighting for." And the boy Tommy, "Coming home with me tomorrow, going to teach him ranching, make him my son." Mother Catherine smiled. "Father Thomas would have liked that. He always said you had more faith than you knew, just expressed it differently. And through a rifle, through protection, through sacrifice, through love." She touched his hand gently. "Faith takes many forms, Captain. Sometimes it wears a nun's habit. Sometimes it carries a gun. God judges the heart, not the weapon." Jake nodded, not quite believing, but appreciating the sentiment. As he prepared to leave the next morning, Grace appeared with a small package wrapped in cloth. "For you," she said, pressing it into his hands. "Something to remember us, Bishai." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple wooden cross carved from mesquite, polished smooth. On the bad words burned into the wood. "Some wars end, some legacies live." "Did you make this?" Sam helped. "But the words are mine." Grace met his eyes. "You taught me that strength and faith aren't enemies, that sometimes protecting the innocent requires force. That's a lesson I'll carry forever." "And you taught me that faith isn't weakness," Jake replied. "That believing in something bigger than yourself takes more courage than I ever had." They embraced briefly, then Jake climbed onto his horse. Tommy sat beside him on a mare they'd bought it from the mission, the boys' few possessions tied behind the saddle. As they rode through the gates, the mission bell rang. Not for vespers or matins, but in celebration, in gratitude, in hope. Jake and Tommy rode north toward the ranch, toward home, toward a future built on lessons learned in blood and fire. Behind them, St. Michael's Mission stood against the Texas sky walls, scarred by bullets, but standing firm. A place of peace defended by war. A sanctuary protected by violence. A home for orphans, saved by an unlikely collection of soldiers, nuns, and one 62-year-old sergeant who knew that legacy wasn't what you took, but what you left behind. The dead were buried, the living endured. And somewhere in the mathematics of survival, in the terrible calculus of violence and mercy, justice and grace, a new chapter was beginning. Thomas Brennan Morrison would grow up learning to ranch, to shoot to survive. He'd hear stories about Nashville and Vanderburgh, about siege and sacrifice. He'd visit William's grave and understand that sometimes love means letting go, and sometimes it means holding on with everything you have. And someday, when he was grown with children of his own, he'd teach them what Jake had taught him. That legacy isn't land or gold or cattle. It's wisdom passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, an unbroken chain stretching back through time. That some wars end, but some legacies live forever. Jake and Tommy crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread below them. 2,000 acres of Texas rangeland built with sweat and blood and stubborn determination. A house that had held joy and grief in equal measure. Land where Rebecca was buried, where William rested beside her. "Is that it?" Tommy asked, voice filled with wonder. "Is that home?" Jake looked at the boy beside him. Young, eager, alive, with possibility. A second chance he didn't deserve, but would honor with everything he had. "Yeah, son," he said quietly. "That's home." They rode down the hill together as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. Behind them, the mission bell continued to ring. Ahead, a future waited to be built. And in the space between two men who'd survived impossible odds and rode toward tomorrow, carrying the weight of the past, but no longer crushed by it. The war was over. The legacy had just begun.